vamos ya a la primera ponente, que es espectacular, es una mujer espectacular. Bárbara Wasson es profesora y directora del Centro de Ciencia, de Tecnología y Aprendizaje de la Universidad de Bergen, en Noruega. SLATE es el Centro Nacional de Competencia para Análisis de Aprendizaje, financiado por el Ministerio de Educación de Noruega, y es miembro del grupo de expertos del Consejo de Europa sobre Inteligencia Artificial y Educación y del Subcomité CEDU de Política de Educación Superior. Ella también fue miembro del grupo de expertos del Gobierno noruego en análisis de aprendizaje, que examinó los aspectos técnicos, pedagógicos y éticos de la implementación de análisis de aprendizaje en el sector educativo noruego. Vamos a escuchar ahora esta ponencia, que va a durar unos 30 minutos, de Bárbara Wasson. Ella se centrará y hablará de las posibilidades de la educación y sobre todo de la inteligencia artificial, ¿no? Como decíamos, tan importante, que no tenemos tantas dudas, ¿no? Y tantos interrogantes, pues nos va a aclarar un poco. Y además compartirá con nosotros pues, investigaciones actuales suyas, importantes de terceros, así como prácticas ya internacionales de referencia. La vamos a recibir con un fuerte aplauso. Bárbara Wasson, por favor, que suba al escenario. Encantada.
Should they move the chairs?
Okay.
Move the chairs so they
Okay.
can see them.
Sí.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak here today and for the pressure to live up to last year's speakers. One of them is my friend, Linda, so we will see. That's probably impossible. So today I've been asked to talk about some of the experiences I've had in implementing learning analytics and adaptive AI in education, to talk about some of the possibilities and challenges. And if we think about the last 10 years or so, we've been going through a digitalization and a datafication of education. And digital education is based around a different set of values. Many of the values, norms, and understandings that underpin the current dominant forms of digital education are fundamentally at odds with the values, norms, and understandings of what might be termed traditional education. And Neil Selwyn, one of the big thinkers in the area, says this. And if we think about datafication, that is looking at the data that we get from the educational sector, in and of the datafication in and of education is a fundamental paradigmic shift based on different sets of values, norms, and understandings as well. So people are saying the same thing. What happens with datafication is that it's as a phenomena, it's linked not only to complex legal dilemmas and ethical issues around human agency. Sorry, my computer is sending messages. I gotta get rid of that. There. Okay, so it's about issues around legal dilemmas, ethical issues, and around human autonomy, privacy, security, and justice. But it's also a larger paradigm shift with the cybernetic age of education and learning. So datafication in the education has a lot of social political consequences around it. And this is a comment from one of my postdocs, Salzman. But the last year, we've seen this accelerated adoption of AI in education. And I say accelerated because AI in education has not existed only for the last 2 years. It's been around since the 50s and 60s in labs and around the late 70s and 80s in schools and universities. So it's just this last year that because of the generative AI, we have seen large shifts and large adoption, and it's on everybody's tongue, and probably everybody in the room has tried some of the new generative AI tools. But what happens here, in my opinion, is that we have larger questions now. We have what is knowledge? Who is defining what knowledge is? If we're going to be using, and one thing that drives me crazy is that the students use the generative AI as a search engine. It's not a search engine. It's generating text for us. And you have to learn to understand the differences for this. But who is deciding what knowledge is? And are we going to allow the big corporations to decide that this knowledge base that they've trained their models on is what is accepted as knowledge? And then for us in education is what is learning. And we all know already we're thinking about how do we have to change our exams, how do we have to change the assignments we give to students. So it's having an extremely large impact on all of us. So I think she introduced that I'm from the Center for the Science of Learning and Technology in Norway. In 2016, our Ministry of Education decided they wanted a center to look at learning analytics and adaptive education, so they gave us funding for 10 years. So we have 2 years left, and then we will become a permanent center at the university. And we have matching funding from the University of Bergen. And we draw on interdisciplinary collaboration. That was one of the requirements of the government, that we had a very mixed background. And we look at the technological, pedagogical, interpretive, cultural, ethical, and legal aspects of learning analytics and artificial intelligence in education. And we try to promote the responsible use of technology in education. You can visit us at our website, SLATE.uibno. We're approximately 22 people. I'm hiring a professor in AI in education if anyone wants to apply, and we're also hiring a new postdoc going to be looking at the impact of generative AI on PhD education, so looking at it in research. And we have an affiliated faculty who works with us on many of our projects. She's from the Faculty of Law. She also works with me in the Council of Europe group that I will mention in a few moments. And we bring in that aspect of the legal aspects of this, and it's ended up being more important than we knew when we started with this work. Just a little bit, if you want to know about us, if you go to the website and go under About, we have annual reports for each year. So, for instance, last year we worked with 45 different institutions across 29 different countries. So you're welcome to go and look. We published 27 journal articles last year, which is not too bad for a small group, and we had 35 different projects. Just a glimpse of the projects. I'm not going to tell much about them. Here's a few of the projects related to learning analytics and AI. I'll tell you a bit more about the first project, the activity data for assessment and adaptation, because that's the one where we've learned the most about implementing learning analytics in schools. We have a couple of projects on trust. How do we trust AI in education? So we have a new project, AI in Education's Layer of Trust. We're going to be looking at how do we identify where trust comes from. If you're looking at the field of trustworthy AI, usually you talk about trustworthy technology, that it's transparent, etc., but that's not where trust comes from. That's only part of the picture. Trust will come between people, between actors, between regulatory organizations and things like that. So you as a teacher should be able to trust the applications you're using in your classroom meet GDPR, for example. And of course, we have a few generative AI projects. So that's the point where I'm coming from. Okay, so that sort of shows a little bit this, some of the far points of what we actually can do with technology. So let's look at some of the opportunities first. And I'm going to base this on some of the work that we've done in the Council of Europe. I'm in the expert group for artificial intelligence in education, and we wrote a report for the Council on the thorough and critical overview of the use of artificial intelligence in education from the lenses of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. This is available on the website. You can download it. And here we talk about learning with artificial intelligence. We talk about using artificial intelligence to learn about learning, or what we call this field learning analytics. And we talk about learning about AI, which is the technical dimension of learning about AI literacy, where we learn about how these technologies work. And we talk about preparing for AI, or a world where AI is involved, and that's what we call the social dimension of the AI literacy. So all of these things are important. So if we start with learning with AI, we can see that, going the wrong way, sorry. We can see that there's many different kinds of technologies, and this is part of one of my points as well, is that AI has been involved in education for a long time. We're using intelligent search engines, maybe without knowing it. There's a lot of use of speech-to-text or text-to-speech apps. There's machine vision apps, facial recognition, as we've seen in some examples, searching, planning, scheduling, and now the generative AI. So not all of these things were not made specifically for education, but they're being used in education. When we look at things that are made for education, we can look back already to the 1980s, and we see these intelligent tutoring systems that adapt themselves to individual students. We can have dialogue-based tutoring, essay generation, essay critiquing. Now we have lots more around chatbots, although they're not just new this last year, etc. When we look at teachers, they can have things to help them with automatic feedback generation. They can monitor discussion forums. They can score essays, look at lesson planning. So there's lots of things for teachers. And for institutions, we can even see things like admission systems, plagiarism detection, summative assessment, dropout prediction, recommendation of courses, and lately a lot of work on looking at using artificial intelligence to support well-being of students. To show a few of the examples, this is a system that was developed a long time ago. You see the first publication was 1985. It's colleagues at CMU in the US. And now there's a commercial company, Carnegie Learning, and they were one of the leading groups in developing these intelligent tutoring systems. What would happen is a student would get a problem, they would get feedback as they solve it. Down at the bottom, you would get hints from the tutor, and you would get the next task you get is adapted depending on how you solve this one. There have been some independent studies of this kind of tool. So Payne, in 2014, studied the effects of these kind of systems in high school with over 16,000 students over 7 states in the US. And what they found was that there was an increase of 8 percentiles for high school students, and interesting, in the second year of use of this system. And that's one thing we often talk about when we're measuring impact. You have to look at it over time. You can't just look at it in a month or 2 months or something. So here they saw quite good gains for the students after using it for a couple of years. We have a similar system in Norway called Multismart Øving. It's from a publisher, and it's used by over 180,000 students and over 9,800 teachers each year. And it's the same kind of thing. We studied it. We found students were doing about 200 tasks a week. This was a replacement tool that replaced the old-fashioned workbook that you had where you sat and solved problems that often went along with the textbooks. And what we found was that students were using it about 30 minutes a week in school and 30 minutes in homework. So that's not much time, and that'll come back to another discussion later. What we found from the teachers' experience, they were mainly positive about the quality of the assignments, the adaptivity, the competence overview they got of the students and the student learning, but they found that it contributed little to the students' conceptual understanding, creativity, or new ideas in mathematics. So they say that it has a role, but it does not replace discussions and reflections of mathematics in the classroom, so more dialogical perspectives on mathematics, but it does have a role, so that's what we need to remember. This is another one developed by a colleague of mine in the States. It's called INC-ITS. Students learn here how to carry out scientific method. So it's about making a goal and a hypothesis, manipulating the simulation, and then communicating the results afterwards. So one thing we know is that kids tend to just start manipulating all the variables and don't understand they should freeze one variable, test it, etc. So this can diagnose all of that. It's modeling in real time, and they get automatic feedback tailored based on the type they're doing, and it's based on complex patented algorithms based on machine learning and natural language processing. But the interesting thing about this one is that it has been evaluated and validated with thousands of students, and it matches, the assessment of these students matches human assessment with approximately 95% accuracy. So that's a lot more attention that each individual student can get than, say, in a normal classroom. So this particular tool is recommended by the US Minister of Education. It's used in 50 states and 12 countries. So here are a couple of examples of systems that have been looked at and evaluated. A couple other, just to have another genre, we have students learning by teaching Betty. So Betty is developed at Vanderbilt, Stanford, and University of Washington. So you have an intelligent agent inside the computer, and the students teach it themselves. Here we have one developed in Eastern Finland and Akkawana University, where it takes students' texts and can make animations and stories for them. So the students write the text and they generate the animations. So it's called AUI Storymaker. And there's a lot of old research, especially with Justine Cassell and colleagues, looking at using avatars, human-size avatars, for, especially with children with autism that can interact with these where there's natural language processing. And this is an old paper, but there's a lot of work gone on since the last 20 years around these kinds of systems as well. So there's many different ways we can use it. Okay, so that's a glimpse into what we can do with AI. If we look at using AI to learn about learning, we're moving into this field of learning analytics, which is the measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of data about learners and their contexts for the purposes of understanding and optimizing learning and the environments in which it occurs. So this is the first definition that was given at the first international conference in 2011. And the most important thing about learning analytics is that it's a process. So you start with some kind of learning activity where you can collect data about it, you can store and process the data, you can analyze it, you can report or visualize it, and you have some kind of feedback actions in a loop. So the most important thing here is that there's always some kind of stakeholder. So the data that you're collecting and analyzing should be shown to somebody for some purpose. And the stakeholders could be a teacher or a learner, it could be a tutor or an assistant, it could be an educational leader, so in a school leader, for instance. It could be for schools or higher education institutions, even for parents, for EdTech developers, to see if your tools can be improved, for instance, policymakers, and in the work so far, most of it has been for researchers, because it comes as a, but it's changing in the last years. But the researchers are using it to help improve systems and to learn what we can do with this kind of data. So what we try to do with it is we look for patterns, make predictions, and look for recommendations. So with patterns, you could be looking for things like engagement or motivation, how engaged are students while they're using a particular tool. Look at learning strategies or paths through learning data and the trends that could be going on. For prediction, there's early warnings about people are not doing so well in a course or about dropouts. There's prediction about who's going to be successful. You can even predict final grades. That one you have to watch legally. And when it comes to recommendations, you could give recommendations for the next tasks that people could work on learning designs, recommend different pedagogical resources, or even recommend giving particular feedback to groups or students, individual students. Very typically, you'll have a dashboard of some sort. So this is one's developed in my lab with Mohammed Khalil and Gleb Belishri. This is used on real data from a MOOC course that's run at one of the universities in Norway. And this is giving a visualization in how the students are using the videos in the class. So in this class, there's 12 videos. And you can see very quickly that video number 4, people are not looking at it. Why are they not looking at it? The data won't tell you why, but it gives you a chance to investigate further yourself as a teacher. So as you're learning design of the course, some of the videos are really important. The one over there, you can hover over them and you can get more information. And here, maybe you can find out people are stopping at a certain point in the video. Is it because it's a difficult concept or something like that? So it gives you something to use to investigate. In the same system, you can generate feedback to clusters of students or individual students. And the point here is that the system is not automatically giving feedback, it's suggesting to the teacher feedback they could give. and the teacher's in control of giving this feedback. So here they can give a notification back to students. If we go back to the Inc. ITS system, here we have a dashboard that follows with that. You've got the 4 steps of the scientific method they're looking at, and you've got the skills that they're looking at, and you have a little glance over and can see how the class is doing. If the one that's highlighted over here, don't know if this, I think it's too light. Yeah, it doesn't work so well. But if you look at the one, the number 12 on the top, it can be opened up and you can find individual students and see how they're actually performing on that particular skill of hypothesis formation. So you can go down for each student and get more information. These can also be represented in other ways. This is Inger Mullner's work. They're working with small children, so that instead of giving them lots of numbers and dashboards, they give them visualizations. Here they're using dolphins and balls and tubes that they can have around their neck. And that gives them, they've done extensive work with children on how to give this kind of information to them. We looked at one study of a tool in Norway, which is an adaptive, or it's a math tool. And we had a master's student who's looked at the opportunities and challenges that exist when using the learning analytics dashboard with the teachers. So we interviewed the teachers and observed them. And as a teacher, one of the teachers says, as a teacher, there are many things that take up your time. So getting a quick overview of exactly what the pupils need the most help with, who needs it most, and what should be emphasized, being able to get data on that frees up time. So here you have the dashboard in the bottom. In addition, it's a documentation of the individual work that pupils do, and we hear that teachers use this kind of information with parents and parent-teacher interviews because they can quickly show what the students have been doing. But in some, it gives a pretty good picture of where the pupil is. But you have to remember this is only part of the picture. So again, the same as the MSÖ tool that we had in Norway, the teachers say, yes, it gives me something, but it's not the whole picture. So we need to look at that together with other aspects. Okay, so now we've looked at artificial intelligence and learning analytics, and I'm often asked, what is the difference between these two? Well, this is my interpretation, is that both of them use data and statistics, both of them use data and algorithms, but the difference is the artificial intelligence is inside the machine, it's sensing what's going on around, it's taking input as you interact with it, or maybe it's sensors of some sort, as in the case in the Chinese example, and it's the automated system, but we can't really see it happening. The learning analytics gives us a glimpse or insights into the students and the learning that's going on inside the system, so they complement each other, where there's always a stakeholder. So we can look and see, the analytics would be which tasks did a student do in a particular order to give us a learning path for them. But that doesn't come from the machine learning. Okay, and if we have carried out in the Council of Europe, we carried out a survey of the member states on what AI and we looked at the policies and strategies, the current practices, and the regulation around these different aspects of AI and learning analytics and the literacy. And just, there's a new, what do we call this in English? Infograph. We published an infograph just 2 weeks ago, and the report will come later about this. And what we found with 25 of the countries answering, that the most common systems being used in Europe right at the moment are adaptive systems, learning analytics, plagiarism checking, and then those are the most high from 10 or more of the countries using those, and then automatic writing evaluations, smart curation of learning materials, for example, and sports support of well-being is further down. Okay, then it's easier to talk about, move over to the challenges when we've seen a bit of the possibilities. And with the challenges, there's many. I'm going to highlight a few of these. Impact, high risk, human rights, democracy, rule of law, competence, use of the data, and environmental issues. So one of the main issues that everybody always asks is what is and how does AI impact teacher decisions in classrooms? And it's hard to answer that question because AI is many things, as I've tried to show you a little bit. Inger Mullner has a nice nice table where she shows who is in control. So is the teacher in control or is the AI in control? And as you go from left to right, there's an increasing control on this part of the system. So increasing automation going from left to right, where the teacher's in control, has no IT in the beginning. To the far right, you could maybe think of Duolingo, where you don't even need a teacher, for instance, and then you've got everything in between. And the more automated you get, the more data that you need to drive these systems. Okay, so the more complicated it gets, the more the data is making the decisions or being part of making the decisions in the system. So we have to think it's not just one kind of system. One thing that we found in at least 3 of the study, in many studies, but at least 3 of the ones I've been involved in, is lack of evidence of impact in the classroom. So we did a survey in 2017. We have the critical view from the Council of Europe in 2022, and then we just published a paper at the end of last year on another study, which I'll give you a bit of insight into. What we find is that these tools tend to be theory poor or theory free. There's little research in classrooms with them, and it's probably because it's very difficult to do. The research developed AI in education, so things coming from the labs, of research labs, tend to be small-scale studies and few independent studies. The 2 examples I've showed you with the cognitive tutors and the Inc. ITS, they have had independent studies of them, but they're the exceptions. And the commercial systems are usually without evidence of impact, and they often involve naive approaches to pedagogy. And this is exemplified in our report, where we talk about the effects of the commercial tools that we see tend to be behavioristic or instructionist and ignore about 60 years of research on pedagogical uses of technology. And they prioritize remembering over thinking and knowing facts over critical engagement, thus undermining learning agency and robust learning. And so most educational technologies are based on a data-based vision of machine behaviorism, what Knox calls machine behaviorism. And this, I mean, maybe it's a process we're going through, but one of our arguments is that we need more tools, for example, that support collaboration. In our latest paper on partnerships of teachers and intelligent technology, we've identified what we call model-based learning analytics, where we have intelligent learning technologies that are designed to make the models of student learning and instruction transparent to teachers. So taking what's going on in the system and visualizing it as learning analytics, and gaining insight to the coupling between the knowledge models that are inside of these systems that underpin the intelligence system and the knowledge used by teachers in their classroom decision-making. So we've carried out a systematic literature review. We have 42 different papers published between 2013 and 2020. The majority of these papers are intelligent tutoring systems or work on learning analytics dashboards, basically what I've shown you so far. And what we're talking about here is that we go from non-transparent to inspectable to transparent to actionable. This is a main problem with artificial intelligence, not just in education, but in many of them, that on the left we have the models or algorithms that are not inspectable for the user. To the next levels, for example, that could be dashboards that just show clusters of students that are working on the same things without giving more insights. It could be models or algorithms that can be inspected by the user, but they display low-level behavioral data. So dashboards showing access statistics to learning resources, how many times did the student look at a video or that kind of thing. Those are very prevalent. The transparent are when the models or algorithms communicate in a language meaningful to users. So here you could have a dashboard showing levels of cognitive engagement of an individual student. So how engaged are they in the work? And in the actionable, the models or algorithms communicate in a way that affords the user making a decision or taking an action. So the dashboard suggesting strategies for the teacher to better guide group work. And then we looked at the claims that they were making in their papers about what they were giving visualizations to the teachers about, or recommendations or reports. And so they're making claims about learner needs, reflecting about their learning designs, supporting individual students, or improving learning orchestration. But what we found in the papers is that about 41% or 22 of 54 claims are unsupported in any way. They have no evidence of the claims that they're making. In addition to that, if we look at the kind of evidence that they can provide, it's either interviews with teachers, log data, observations, self-report tests. It's also showing the same thing that we write about in the Council of Europe report, that there's no external evidence. There's no external people evaluating this. It's all done by the researchers themselves. And when we move to benefits, from benefits for teachers and evidence to benefits for learners, there's even less evidence. There's 50, you can't see it probably, but it says there's 57% of the claims were unsupported as well. In January, there was an article in the New York Times asking several of the big names about, will chatbots teach your children? And Sal Khan from Khan Academy predicted last year that AI tutoring bots would soon revolutionize education. And big tech execs have the similar visions. If you've been in the field for long enough, you know this revolutionize is a little bit of a maybe used to promote or to get reaction, because revolutionize, I'm not sure, maybe, we'll see. But one of my favorite big thinkers is Ben Williamson, who I think he says it absolutely in a way that I agree with him, is that there's a rush to proclaim the authority and usefulness of these kinds of chatbot interfaces and the underlying language models that power them. But the evidence that these chatbots can deliver those effects does not yet exist. And I think at the end of 2023, I was looking at how many publications there were on the chatbots, and it was absolutely exploded. And I thought, like, who's had time to really look at this effect? Like, it's, you know, very much opinions of people. There's no evidence. We don't have the long-term studies. If you remember the one study I showed, it took 2 years to show impact. So yes, we can have lots of speculation, but if we're really going to make decisions in education, let's try to get some really good evidence. Okay, so when we're talking about AI in education, what's so special about it, and why do we really need to pay attention? Well, it's because we're really dealing with children, and children have special protection rights. So if we're looking at the AI Act, we know that social scoring, facial recognition, dark pattern AI, and manipulation is an unacceptable risk. And education comes right under that as being a high risk. And that's because we need to minimize the risk of erroneous or biased AI-based decisions that come in the data. As we know, the data is very biased. And we need to protect children's vulnerability. Educational data and algorithmic predictions can decide about student and young people's life chances, their potential access to jobs, their future career paths. If we're predicting grades or having the AI generate grades, that's really unacceptable. And there was already cases with the International Baccalaureate during the pandemic doing this and having to take this back. But it's also, we don't know the long-term significant impact of personalized education on their cognitive, emotional, and personal development. So we don't know yet. When it comes to ethics and policy, we're seeing lots of documents coming out from UNESCO, the World Economic Forum, UNICEF, Council of Europe as well. But in the policy guidance on AI for children, which is not just on education, they write that children interact or are affected by AI systems that are not designed for them, and the current guidelines are not taking this into account. Moreover, we know that how the children interact with these is only the beginning. The disruptive effects of AI will change children's lives in ways we can't understand, for better or for worse. So what we need to do is critical. We need to think today about what we're doing in order to give them a future that they deserve. So this is important. I know there's policymakers here and government leaders, and you need to think about these kinds of things. Ben Williamson also talks, as an example of this, he talks about what precision learning that will allow for the collection and production of intimate data about students' psychological, neuroscience, and genetic characteristics. And the challenges of a growing convergence, for example, digital technologies and neuroscience research are also receiving increasing attention. with a particular focus on the implications for education and learning, so-called biodigitalism. Do we want to allow this? At the Council of Europe, we're with our values of human rights, democracy, and rule of law, and Lana will go into a bit more in detail, but I'll just say 3 things we're working on at the moment is a legal instrument on regulating the use of AI systems in education. This is a preparatory study that will then be going on to form the basis of regulation. We're working on a policy toolkit for learning with and about artificial intelligence, where we've got 3 categories. We're looking at governance, competences, and education. And finally, we're looking at a European review framework to assess artificial intelligence systems used for educational purposes and or in educational systems. So how can we assess these? And the work should be hopefully done, at least the major part of it, by October. We will have a conference in October where these things will hopefully take good shape. Just quickly around what we're talking about around competence. In our report, we talk about 2 dimensions of it, the technical and the social dimensions of it. And we want to ensure that all citizens are prepared for how AI can impact their lives and help them understand issues such as ethics, data bias, disinformation, surveillance, and the potential impact on their work. We see curriculums coming up. AI4K12.org has a very interesting framework. The UNESCO has a report where they reviewed 12 different K-12 AI curricula from around the world. So we're starting to see these kinds of curricula coming, at least in Scandinavia. Both Sweden and Denmark are coming with a curriculum for schools. We have the DigiComp 2.2 framework, which has brought in aspects of humans interacting with AI, the different kinds of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that you need to look at. Learn to Analyze was an Erasmus Plus project where they looked at the skills needed by instructional designers, e-trainers that could also be relevant for teachers and school leaders. This one is much more focused on sort of a data science perspective about how you actually use data and manipulate it, analyze it, etc. And then I'll tell a bit more about a project we've had, just finished in December. It was on data literacy for citizenship, and if we were doing it again, we would call it citizenry, not citizenship. This one, we've had 2 Spanish partners, University of Murcia and University des Îles Balears, excuse my pronunciation, so I bring it up. But here we've developed, and this one was focusing on data literacy for adults. And we have made our own framework that has 4 parts, understanding data, acting on data, engaging through data, and ethics and privacy, and looking at different aspects of that for us as citizens and how we should do it. We have a game-based learning approach. We've made 10 downloadable games, 5 digital mini games, 1 digital escape room, and an actual board game. And these things, it's one of the most satisfying projects I've ever worked in. It was a lot of work, and we produced a lot of things. There's download and then just print them, and you can cut them out and play them yourself. And the thing is that they're being used still after the project. So the picture on the far right is a picture of Linda with the Spanish teachers working with the framework and the games. The bottom are where we have used it. I use it in some courses at the university, and we've used it at the library playing games. And in fact, in Norway, the people working in the prison systems are using these games to teach prisoners who aren't allowed on the internet about digital things that are happening using these analog games, which is something we hadn't expected. The other thing that I've been involved in is we developed datareisen.no. If you want to learn about data, it's available in both Norwegian and English. This is in the vein of elements of AI. So we worked with a text writer who took our academic language and helped make it into something that's understandable for even my mother, for instance. So it's getting a lot of good feedback. You can get a certificate following it. This little blob in the middle changes as you go through the entire course. It takes about 10 hours. And I use this as the literature, or the pensum, we call it in Norwegian, in 2 courses at the university. So I have one course on data literacy called Fantastic Data, where it's for UIB staff and students. It's been going for 6 semesters now. I have about 200 students and staff each semester. And just yesterday finished the first version of the course that we opened up to industry or for workers, and I had 500 people taking the course. And I'll tell you, in 30 years of teaching, I have never had such good feedback on a course in my life. They absolutely love it, and I think it's because it gives them personal understanding of data, what it is, how we collect it, how we can use it, and it gives them power in their encounters with data in their workplace or in their lives as students, etc. So this is, again, open to anybody. So what about the data and the algorithms? I'll tell you we had a project that went from 2017 to it's just finishing up this year. It was together with the municipality of Oslo. We were the research partner in the project, and it was funded by the Organization for Municipalities in Norway. And it was an R&D project that was identifying opportunities and insights and highlights the challenges the educational sector faces when it comes to the use of student activity data in learning analytics. So what we were doing is we were collecting data across many different tools. So you see here. And that was being collected in a learner record store, and then we were analyzing it. We've made dashboards that show students' competence development across these tools. And we've made actually a tool for that uses this kind of activity data to charge the vendors or who deliver the tools based on use. Instead of a school having to make an agreement for an entire year for a tool and having 2 teachers use it, they get paid by the use of the tools. So this has been most influential for me in the last couple of years. And this is, can we use the data? Are we allowed to use this data? So who owns the data? And there we have the privacy regulations, we have the GDPR, and we have the national laws. We have consent and obligation that you have to look at. And I think it's really important to understand that GDPR alone is not enough. You have to look at the laws that you have in your own country with regards to education. Can we use the data? You know, if you're using a tool, you have to carry out a data protection impact analysis or assessment, DPA. It looks at the risk analysis, and you need to have input all the stakeholders, the parents, the students, the teachers, the schools, the owners. This is difficult work, and it takes a long time. You also need the data handling agreement with the vendors who are delivering the tools to the schools, looking at storage, about how long the data can be stored, etc. We were involved with this particular project in the first sandbox for artificial intelligence in Europe. So it was run by our Norwegian Data Protection Agency, where we looked at the legal basis for handling student data for adaptive systems and learning analytics in Norway. We worked for 9 months with them, and what we found was our Norwegian laws are not specific enough. You could say we shouldn't be allowed to use student data in schools, or from schools in Norway. Do we actually have the data? Can you access it? So for us, a big issue was, could we get hold of the data that we wanted from the vendors? It was real-time or scheduled. We had to ask them to implement an API for us to access. This showed up to not be so easy to do. Do we have the right data? And this one I say we're at the mercy of the learning tool developers. And this, I know there's a lot of you here today, but this is a good point where we have to work together, because the data that you decide to save from your tools and from the interactions may not be the right data that we need as educators to make decisions about what's happening, etc. So there needs to be a dialogue around this. Is the data in the right format? We have these discussions about whether we should be using international standards for representing educational data, like XAPI. We have the algorithms. People, I think, that don't work with this maybe think it's really easy to develop an algorithm, but it's not. It takes a lot of time. You have to look at the validity and the reliability of the results, and it's very little often that it is transferable to other situations. And the results, how certain are you of your results? There can be legal repercussions of your results. And communication, there is requirements from GDPR to be transparent, explainable, and to look at all stakeholders. Okay, and finally, I just want to mention here that there's environmental concerns as well. We have to think about all these algorithms and data require greater energy and environmental resources, so we need to think about these kinds of things. I was going to tell you about this, but I'm over time, so I think I will skip this. This is this work that we did on learning analytics in Norway and implementing it. The only thing I will tell you here is that we used 2 years on this, the GDPR, looking at the GDPR and the national laws. For the legal issues, 17 pages. This is how complicated it gets. And then we delivered a report to the government about the pedagogical, legal, ethical, infrastructure support and competence needs for using this data in the education. Okay, in summary, it's complicated. So if you're going to use AI or you're going to use especially student data in order to do analytics, it's complicated. AI is a complex social technical artifact that must be understood as something that's constructed through complex social processes. So we're talking about humans and technology in a particular context. And I hope you've learned artificial intelligence is not just ChatGPT. And I have 6 main points. There's a plethora of AI techniques and tools used in education or can be developed to be used. Sorry. AI in education is considered high risk, so we really need to reflect on what we're doing. There's a great need for appropriate, robust regulation addressing human and children's rights. There's need for national digital infrastructures, data management, standards and common solutions, environmental concerns. I didn't get time to talk about this, but that's also important. There's demand for competence development across this entire sector, not just teachers and students, but also the school leaders, the data privacy officers who are working with these regulations. And we need more research funding for impact of AI in education. So we need research-based AI for education. So we need to find out how can we work in partnerships between research, EdTech companies, schools, etc., and how can we get the research into these tools. Pedagogical innovation is necessary, so this goes to the schools and to the teachers. It's going to come from you. Other people can't tell you how to use these things. You're not going to have to be, and I think we're seeing this happening with ChatGPT, how people are working it into their teaching. And assessment innovation is necessary. I didn't have time to go into that, but we all know that the whole problem with the generative AI has been assessment, accreditation. How are we going to do that in the future? Nobody knows. So what we need is multidisciplinary approaches, bringing together educators, learners and parents, learning scientists, philosophers, computer scientists, and AI engineers, commercial developers, and governments to ensure impactful, reliable, safe, and desired AI for education. Okay.